Can I just check actually? Can you hear me? Can somebody give me a yes in the chat and just let me know that you can hear me because I know you can't see me. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Right. So session 3 of 3. Um, thank you so much, Rhodes Avenue, for being so open and so wonderful with these anti-racism sessions. As I said, I am quite sad that they're coming to an end because I do enjoy doing them. But to sum up what we talked about last week we talked a lot about diversity and the importance of diversity and celebrating other people's cultures. And I said that diversity in and of itself isn't enough. We are incredibly lucky to live in London, and London is one of the most diverse cities in the world. But that's not enough. We need to make sure that we are encouraging our children to see the wonder and beauty in diversity as well. And one way in which we can do this is by kind of unpacking and unpicking our own behavior and making sure that we are not perpetrating any biases, be that unconscious or otherwise, because our children pick up on that. So even if we do live in a really diverse city and we say, yep, I love my neighbors and my friends are this and whatever it might be, if you carry unconscious biases or you behave slightly negatively towards particular groups of people, your children are so intuitive and are able to pick up on that. So let's just make sure that we are not carrying those biases so that our children don't pick up on those things. Celebrate your culture. I think it's so important to celebrate your culture and talk about other cultures in your home. So talking about other religious festivals and understanding other religious festivals and talking about other ways of life, for example, religious clothing and whatever it might be, I think is so, so important. And I also said that affirmations are very, very key. So it's all about building up self esteem for everybody. I think every single child should have the opportunity to know and to hear on a regular basis how wonderful they are and how beautiful they are, regardless of who they are and what their background is. So that's what we talked about last week. Moving on, however, let's have a look at what we're going to be discussing today. So today I really want to discuss boundaries. So giving your child the tools to set healthy boundaries, because that's an important skill that I think many children actually lack the ability to say, actually, no, I don't like that, or please stop. Um, Linked into that is the idea of, not the idea, is racist bullying. So what should you do if your child is the victim of racism? And what should you do if your child is the perpetrator? Because I think that's a really important conversation that we tend to shy away from. So let's talk about what happens when your child actually says something that isn't acceptable. We're also going to be talking about what to do if your child sees something that makes them feel uncomfortable, how they can safely stand up for themselves and for other people. And we'll kind of wrap up and reiterate all of the points that we've been making over the past couple of weeks about being an actively anti-racist person.
Εγώ πρέπει να φάω, μετά μπορώ.
So
Να φας και θα το κάνουμε μετά.
that's the plan for today. We'll also have a Q&A and a kind of opportunity at the end to wrap up. So let's go. I included this quote, and it's when you know better, you do better. And it's by Maya Angelou, who's one of the greatest writers, I think, of modern times. She was a writer, she was a poet, she was a speaker, she was everything. She's absolutely wonderful. If you don't know her stuff, I would highly recommend reading the first book in her series. She wrote a series of autobiographies, and the first one is called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And beautiful. So if you don't know Maya Angelou, please check her out. And the reason I included this quote is because I think it's so true. When you know better, you do better. So when you know about racism and you know about racial inequalities and you have these conversations with your children, it allows them to be a bit more open-minded and really kind of be on the right side of history in fighting against those sorts of things. So when children are open to having such conversations they're more likely to recognize diversity as something that should be celebrated. So when we have these conversations and we talk about it and we kind of make it a norm, the children are more likely to recognize how wonderful it is, and they will want to celebrate, the diversity in the world. When diversity and difference are lauded as positive, children are more likely to stand up against prejudice. So it's really interesting when I do work in schools, I go in and I say, I talk to the children about inequalities in the world. And even the really young ones, I've even had this conversation with children who are in nursery. And when you explain to them that sometimes this happens, sometimes people are not nice to other people because of skin color, they are totally outraged and immediately kind of just they want to do something about it because they recognize how awful that kind of behavior is, and they'll say, so next time I go to the park and I see somebody doing that, I'm going to tell them to stop. Or next time at school someone does this, I'm going to tell the teacher. And I think that's so, so wonderful. And the trick is to, encourage them to think of diversity as a good thing. And then they will kind of be empowered um, to stand up against it when somebody's saying that diversity is not a good thing. It's really, really important. And I've been saying this for the past 3 weeks. It's so important to talk. It's really, really important to talk about these things. Because if we don't talk about these things, we're almost upholding a culture of silence and denial, which I don't think is healthy. And people who don't talk about things early on in life often find it difficult to talk about things when they become adults. So if we start the children early and give them the tools to know how to have these sometimes uncomfortable conversations, then it will be easier for them to kind of grow up having these conversations and being actively anti-racist. Um, so let's talk about that. How do we encourage the children to stand up for themselves? Standing up for ourselves is such an important skill. Um, and I just want to start by saying, I think it's really important to give the children this permission almost to stand up for themselves. Because a lot of children who I work with and who I've encountered sometimes equate telling someone to go away with, you know, with rudeness. Okay. And I think that's so, I can absolutely understand that. I was a massive people pleaser as a child, and I never wanted to upset anyone, even if, they were in the wrong. And so I think a lot of the times children look for permission and don't know that they're allowed to tell people to go away because they've been told or they believe, oh, actually, that's rude. So I should just kind of, sit down and take it. When we know as adults that's absolutely not true. And using your voice is so, so important. Being the victim of racism is so damaging for your self esteem. It's really, really awful for your sense of self and your self image and, and just your mental well being in general. So it's very important for children to be reminded of their inherent value and worth. And it's really important that we support them through any experiences of racism. And this links into my next point on the screen, that it's important that children know that they don't have to put up with racism in any shape or form. They absolutely do not have to put up with that. Sometimes children, again, they do this thing. So, in order for them to fit in, sometimes they'd rather not say anything. And sometimes, I think even as adults, we can all probably say that we've been in a situation where somebody said something uncomfortable. And I don't know, it might be a colleague or something like that. But anyway, someone said something uncomfortable and you don't want to make the situation awkward. So you almost laugh or you brush it under the carpet because you don't want to be the outsider or you don't want to be the one drawing attention to yourselves. I think we need to kind of stop doing that. I saw a video recently and somebody said something so interesting. They said, if I am uncomfortable, we will all be uncomfortable. And I thought, you know what? I can absolutely relate to that. Why does one person have to feel, that discomfort? Why should we have to brush it under the carpet or laugh it off or not make a scene in inverted commas? So let's tell the children, no, actually, You don't have to do that. You don't have to sit there and laugh or smile or do whatever to make other people feel comfortable. We can all be uncomfortable. And maybe if we're all uncomfortable, maybe things will change. So, one thing that I think is so key is to tell the children that they are allowed to have boundaries. And I've taken this quote from one of my favorite books. It's called This Book is Anti-Racist, and it's by a wonderful woman called Tiffany Jewell. It's a fantastic book. I would recommend it though for people aged 10 and above. It's quite mature. Um, and if, for whatever reason you do want to look at it with a younger child, then please just support them through it because I think it's got some quite mature concepts in there. But anyway, Tiffany Jewell has this wonderful section in the book about boundaries. And she talks about the fact that we are all entitled to boundaries. We all have boundaries and we are allowed to have them. And this is what she says. She said, a boundary is an imaginary line that separates me from you. It separates your physical space, your feelings, needs, and responsibilities from others. Your boundaries also tell people how they can treat you, what's acceptable and what isn't. Without boundaries, people may take advantage of you because you haven't set limits about how you expect to be treated. And I thought that's a really interesting concept and very well phrased. So, telling children that we're all allowed to have our boundaries and that stops people, you can have your physical space, you can have your space in terms of how you feel and what you need and what you and responsibilities from others. So encourage the children to really understand that. With boundaries, however, I just want to put a little disclaimer in here because as much as it's really important to have this conversation with your child, I think we do need to recognize that sometimes, saying to someone, that's not acceptable and you violated my boundaries is not the right thing to say. So, for example, when if you're telling your child about boundaries, I obviously don't mean that they're allowed to say, no, mummy, I don't want to brush my teeth. You're violating my boundaries by telling me to brush my teeth. That is absolutely not what I mean. So, of course, this comes with some nuance. This is about really unpleasant behavior from other children and other people that they know is unreasonable. Okay, so it's about unreasonable behavior. It's not about saying no. I'm not going to bed. Stop violating my boundaries. I'll go to bed when I want to go to bed. No, we're not saying that, of course. Um, so tell them about boundaries and tell them that they're allowed to establish their boundaries and they are allowed to tell people, no, I don't like what you're doing. I don't find that funny. I don't find that nice. You're getting a little bit too close. They are absolutely allowed to do that. So encourage your child to speak up. It's so key that children learn how to articulate themselves when they feel that their boundaries aren't being respected. We also have to recognize that everyone's boundaries are different, and it's important that we give the children autonomy and agency to set their own boundaries. So, again, I just want to say this is not saying, children are allowed to do whatever they want and it's going to be kind of like a lawless society. No, but we need to respect their boundaries. If a child comes to you and says, oh, so and so at school was, touching my hair and I really didn't like it, it's important to validate that. And even if you yourself would not have minded that, or you know that other people don't mind having their hair touched, it's it's not about that. That's their boundary, and that's okay. If they didn't like it, that's completely okay. And we can't really. It's really not nice of us to turn around and say, "Oh well, you're just being a bit too sensitive." Let them establish their boundaries for themselves. Um, how can they establish boundaries? Well, they can use some of these key phrases. That hurt my feelings. Please stop. That's racist, or that feels racist. I don't like that. Don't touch my hair. I don't like the way you're treating me. Leave me alone. That's not funny. Okay, so giving your child permission to say some of these things and not feel bad about it. Because again, why should they be on the receiving end of unpleasant behavior? Sometimes you just need to tell a person, no, I don't like that. Stop touching me. That's not funny. Leave me alone. Or maybe I'll play with you later. Or this is a bit too, you're hurting me. Okay. So things like that are so important for children to be able to say. And of course, this almost transcends racism. These are really important phrases, I think, that just everyday behavior and even safeguarding. With regards to safeguarding, I think it's really important again that we give children permission and the tools and the language to tell someone if something is happening that they don't like and is making them feel uncomfortable. Giving them the language and the tools to say, no, I don't like this, I'm uncomfortable. So important for keeping children safe. To have this conversation with your child and tell them that, yeah, you are allowed to say that to someone and you're not going to get in trouble, and don't worry about how they feel in that moment, because if you're feeling bad and sad, you should be allowed to tell someone that you don't like it. So that's giving them kind of this encouragement to speak out. Let's talk about that though in a bit more detail. Let's bring it back to racism and discuss what to do if your child is experiencing racism. This is a really awful thing, and I really hope that anybody watching this, whether live or later on, feels as though they can go to the school and tell the school, actually, this is what is happening. If your child is experiencing racism, encourage them to speak to someone they trust. So encourage them to speak to you, encourage them to speak to whoever it is at home, grandparents, aunties, uncles, encourage them to tell a teacher. And if they themselves are not too keen on telling the teacher, then absolutely go to the school and tell somebody. Encourage them that, if it happens again, to go and sit with a friend, for example, so that they don't feel alone in the moment. This is not about saying, if something racist happens, don't tell, just go and tell one of your age mates. It's just about, giving them somebody who can kind of sit with them if they're feeling sad. Encourage them to report what's happening. And I've put that in there because I cannot tell you how many children I have worked with. And again, when I go into schools and I do workshops and things like this, and they don't want to tell anyone, especially older children, especially, I think, I would even say it starts in year 4, 5, 6, not wanting to tell a teacher for reasons that we will discuss later on, but encourage them to report what's happening. Remind them that they're not alone and say to them, you are not alone. I'm here. Whoever else is within your kind of immediate circle is here, grandma's here, auntie, this and that. We all love you. Just giving them that reassurance that they've got a support network around them is very, very important. Remind them that nobody has the right to discriminate against them based on race or ethnicity ever. Tell them, that was not okay and that's not funny, and they should not have done that to you. Nobody should speak to you in that way. That's not okay. Remind them that they deserve love and respect, because whether or not we like it, even if it's a one-off, as I said earlier, racism chips away at your self-esteem. So if a child says something racist, let's say A says something racist to B, even if A only does it one time, that is enough to plant seeds of doubt in B. And so it's really important to just get rid of all that doubt and tell B that actually that is completely untrue. What they said is not true. You're completely, you're wonderful, you're beautiful, and you don't deserve that treatment. And we love you very, very much. Give them praise. So talk about how wonderful and amazing and beautiful they are. Say, actually, that's completely false. Your hair is fantastic. We know that's really silly. Like, I love the fact that you look like this, and that's so brilliant. Just giving them that positive reinforcement and not allowing that seed of doubt to even be planted is so important. praise them and tell them well done for speaking up. Okay, so say you've done the right thing. I'm really proud of you. It must have been really scary when it was happening. I'm so proud that you've come to me and I'm really happy and we can sort this out. Okay, don't worry, I'll sort it out. So these are some of the things that I think you should say if your child is experiencing racism. Um, but I don't want to leave it there. And again, I think this is something that many people shy away from, and we give our children the tools to know what to say when it comes to, things like anti-bullying, and we talk about anti-bullying week and anti-racism and things like that. But I think we need to start having really open and honest conversations about what to do if your child is the perpetrator. Okay, because this happens, and as most of you know, I've said this a couple of times. I was a teacher for many years, and it's really, really uncomfortable to make those two phone calls. First of all, the phone call to the victim, explaining to their parents or guardian that actually their child has been the victim of racism, but it's quite unpleasant to to pick up the phone and call home and say, by the way, your child said this and it was quite racist, or they did this and it was very racist. No teacher, and I promise you this, no teacher ever wants to make that phone call. No, but we do not want that. We absolutely don't want that, but we have to. So please try and see it from the teacher's point of view. We take no pleasure in making any of those phone calls. They're massively difficult, and we're not doing it to um, pick on you or to criticize you as a parent. That's not what it's about at all. So please bear with teachers if this happens. So let's start at the top. If this happens, and say you are there when the occasion happens, when your child says or does something racist, please don't ignore it, because if you ignore it, you've essentially given them the thumbs up to that behavior. I remember years ago, I was in, it's not called Durnsford Park anymore. It's the park next to Rhodes Avenue, Oliver Tambo Rec. There we go. Um, and a child said something really racist, and this child was to me. This child must have been about 5 years old, and they were with their parent, and the parent didn't say anything. They looked super uncomfortable and just kind of grabbed the child and walked off. And the child just went off on his scooter. And I always remember thinking to myself, if that were me, I would have said no. That's really not okay, because what they've done there, what they did there is they gave them permission, because the message is, well, if I say something unpleasant, mummy or daddy or grandpa or grandma, whoever I'm with, is not going to say anything. And because they didn't say anything, it must mean that it's fine. So please don't ignore it. Another thing that I've that's kind of come up time and time again is parents thinking that when a child says something like this, they're doing it for attention. So years ago when I first started teaching, I had a situation where, again, something racist was said, and a child said, and the parents said, no, they're just saying it for attention. So let's not feed them. They want attention, so let's just ignore that behavior because they're doing it for attention. Um, if that is the case, if they are doing it for attention, then there are other issues at hand there that need to be unpacked. But as well, if we continue to ignore it, then they're going to keep doing it. So please do not ignore this sort of behavior. The second thing I would say is listen fully to the story. So it's really easy to go straight into defense mode, especially when it's about your child. No parent wants that conversation, or nobody wants to hear that their child has done something like this. So I think it's important to know that I understand that. Okay, and like I said, this is not coming from a place of judgment or shame or blame. But before you go into, no, it wasn't my child, and my child would never do such a thing, and we're not like that, and I think you've got it wrong. It's really important to listen to the story, because again, um, there will be something there, and I think you need to hear it. Have a conversation with them. Explain that that kind of behavior is not right, and it's not okay, and it's not acceptable, and explain why. And because children, that's their favorite word when they're little in particular. Why? So sometimes it's not enough to say, no, don't say that. You have to go back and have those conversations. And if we go back to session one, I included some information of how to have these conversations with your children. So I think it would be good to look back on that if you need to, but literally say to them, that's not okay, because actually we're all human beings and we shouldn't treat anybody differently based on their skin color. Okay, that is not a good thing to do. That's not a good way to behave. That's not acceptable. Okay, so give them the reason as to why they shouldn't be acting like that. Um, remember that your child is watching you. So how you respond to such incidents is really, really important. So again, if we take the scenario of let's say your child has said something or done something racist, and you absolutely kick off and you say, no, the school are lying, that child is lying, my child would never, so on and so forth. And they genuinely have, okay, and the child has said something racist, and they've overheard you defending them without hearing both sides of the story. It's really nice for them to know that you're on their side, but what have we done? We've emboldened them, because now they're thinking, well, I can get away with this sort of behavior, and therefore I'm going to do it again. So it's so important, like I said, and this is why it's so key to listen to the full story and get the facts before we kind of launch into this. No, it wasn't me, and my child wouldn't do that, and my son wouldn't, my daughter wouldn't, and so on and so forth. So really, really think about how you react to such incidents. Encourage them to apologize. Do not apologize for them. So what I'm going to say here is it's really key that your child knows how to apologize. That's one thing that I'm so keen on. I'm really keen on children knowing how to say sorry, because sometimes when we say to a child, you've got to say sorry, they'll literally say, oh, um, you know, Miss Lawton said that I have to say sorry to you, and that's not a real apology. Or they'll go up to the person, and because they're still heated from the argument, they'll say sorry in that way that isn't, helpful. It isn't a real apology. We need to teach children how to apologize properly. Um, do not apologize for them. I think it's nice if something, if your child has been the perpetrator, I think it's a nice gesture to sometimes talk to the other child's parent, but you can't do it on their behalf, because again, they're not learning. So I think it's important for your child to say sorry to the other child first, and then if you do still want to talk to the parent or whatever, I think that's a really lovely gesture and it's a really nice thing to do. But do not do it on their behalf. They've got to learn how to apologize. It's such an important skill. Talk to them about doing better. So like Angela said, when you know better, you do better. So when you've educated them and you've informed them as to why that kind of behavior is not acceptable, and they've apologized and so on and so forth, you need to talk to them about how they handle themselves in future. Okay, so giving them the skills to have healthier communication methods, because of course racism is not a healthy communication method. There's something I want to talk about, and I kind of alluded to it earlier on when I said, when I said that thing about children not wanting to report things to teachers or parents and things like that. And this was something that, again, as a teacher, really, really made me it used to drive me around the bend. The idea of being a snitch. Things would happen all the time in the classroom, and kids would say, I don't want to be known as a snitch. I'll say, why didn't you tell me? Oh, I didn't want them to say I was a snitch. I don't want to be known as a snitch. I didn't want to be a telltale. And I so understand that your rep is so important, especially when you're kind of getting to upper key stage 2, year 4, year 5, and year 6. But I think we need to have conversations with children about this as well. When is it appropriate to get help? And why sometimes actually getting help is the best and the right thing to do. let's have those conversations with your children. Tell them that actually reporting racism is not snitching. It's not snitching. It's not, it's not trying to get somebody else in trouble. It's trying to do the right thing in a situation and help in a way that is productive. Okay, and that is not the same as going and telling the teacher that someone else is, I don't know, fiddling with a paperclip. If your child interrupts a maths lesson to tell the teacher something like that, then that's not the greatest thing in the world. But of course, those are not on the same level. Like making a fuss over something really minor and trying to get somebody into trouble is not the same as seeing something that's wrong, morally wrong, and completely unacceptable, and going to get help from a teacher. So let's talk about this. What should your child do if they witness racism? And again, a lot of this comes from Tiffany Jewell's book. This book is anti-racist. If you do nothing, nothing will change, is one of the lines from this book. And I think that's a really kind of straightforward and wonderful way of explaining to a child how racism can kind of be, the cycle of racism can continue. If you do nothing, nothing will change. And again, have open conversations. I heard somebody the other day referring to such conversations as hot conversations, honest, open, and transparent. Have those hot conversations and say to them, maybe you don't see the injustice, or maybe you don't see how it's unfair, or, maybe it can be a bit confusing to figure out what's happening, or maybe you hope someone else will figure out what's happening. Maybe you feel like you can't do anything because it's not safe, and those are all very valid. But if you know something isn't sitting right with you and you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable and it's safe to intervene, okay, because again, safety is really important. We're not trying to encourage children to go and intervene where something really big is happening and it's too big a situation for them. We're not talking about that. But if it's at school and the timing is right and it's safe, absolutely they can say something, and absolutely they should say something. And again, have those conversations and say, by staying silent, what you're doing is you're telling other people that you're okay with their behavior. Okay, so this is what it means to be a bystander, and not in a good way. So when we say bystander, we of course we just mean someone who's standing by and seeing kind of the events unfold. So if we are a bystander during a time of racism and we don't intervene and we don't say anything, we don't protest, that can make it look like we agree with the negative behavior. And if we don't agree with the negative behavior, then we almost need to show that and say, I don't agree with this. I think what you're doing is wrong. I'm going to get help. I don't like this. Um, Being aware of racism isn't enough. Okay, so it's really good that we're having these conversations about race and racism and things like that, but we need to be actively anti-racism. So it's not enough to just say, yep, I've had conversations with my parents or my family and I've learned about it in school. This is real life. And actually, we should do things like telling the teacher, like getting help, to make sure that other people um, change, and to make sure that the world goes forward in a positive way. Using your voice is really, really important. And that's one way we can be allies. Okay, so allies, active bystanders, actively anti-racist, friends, anti-bullying, all of those words. That's what we're striving for, and that's what we want the kids to know that they can do. In the book, this book is actively anti-racist, and again, I am going on about this book. It's so brilliant, honestly. In the book, Tiffany Jewell talks about the power of interruption, and I think that's a really, really wonderful way of phrasing it. So sometimes interrupting is good, and she describes interruption as a superpower. And it's important to know when that you can interrupt when you know something's not right. And again, this comes with a caveat. If we're having these conversations with our children, because with their children, we need to let them know that actually interrupting is not always appropriate. If you're in the middle of your history class and the teacher's trying to explain something and you want to randomly kind of interject and talk about something that you saw in the park on Sunday that has nothing to do with the lesson, that's not a very helpful interruption. So again, we are not giving them permission for life to be a free for all. There are still rules and there are still things that we need to, um, there are rules that we need to follow. But we're talking about when things are uncomfortable and you see something playing out that you know is wrong, how to interrupt that. Okay, so give your children the tools and say, sometimes you can literally just tell a person to stop. I saw this happen wonderfully in a school I was in recently, and a child was saying something, and they said, "No offense, but," and before they even had a chance to finish their sentence, another child said, normally when you start a sentence with "no offense, but," you're probably going to say something really offensive. So I wouldn't even finish that sentence if I were you. And the other child stopped. And I thought it was so good. And I thought, you know what? Please give me some of that confidence because I wish I could say that to someone. And I'm a grown woman. That was the power of interruption. They knew something bad was coming. They could feel it brewing and they just went straight in there. And I thought that is exactly what I'm talking about. So give your child the tools to say, sometimes you need to just say, no, I don't think this is a really good idea. And no, let's not do that. And I think what you're saying is wrong. Okay. So give them the power of interruption. And you can practice that. um, think about what would you do scenarios. Okay, so I think practice is a really nice thing. So when you're at home with your children, say to them, "Oh, what would you do if you saw?" and describe a situation. What would you do if you saw somebody being pushed over on the playground? What would you do if you heard somebody saying something bad about someone else? And just try and figure out what their answers are going to be. And if they genuinely don't know, then it's a good thing that you've brought it up because then you can talk about it and then you can give them these interruption powers. Okay, so having those conversations is really important. Tiffany Jewell also talks about the power of listening. And essentially, the idea is that we need to be picky about who and what we listen to. So, encouraging your children to think about who they will listen to. What is it that they will listen to? When you will listen and when you will interrupt. So let's just talk about the first two. So who will you listen to and what is it that you will listen to? This is not about saying, you should only listen to people who you agree with. But it's about saying if somebody says something that you don't agree with, are you going to take that as gospel and as fact? Okay, so I'll give you an example. If there is a child at school who says absolutely horrible things, racist things, you know, things, just awful things, is that somebody who are you going to believe what they're saying? Okay, so it's about giving children the skills to think critically about the things that people say. What is it that you will listen to? Again, it's about giving the children the skills to kind of decipher, is what this person saying actually factually true? Or, is this something that I should definitely be listening to? It That's what we're talking about here. When will you listen and when will you interrupt? Again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about it not being a free for all. It's not about telling the kids you're allowed to interrupt and interject whenever you feel like it, because that's not how life works. It's about giving them those skills to figure out when is a good time for me to listen and when is it a good time for me to say, actually, no, that's wrong. Don't do that. How will you listen so that you really and truly are hearing what's being said? Okay, so careful listening, active listening, because there's a difference between hearing and listening. And I think, again, these are skills that we need to give our children. So talk to them about all of those things. talk to them about the nature of being a human being as well. So how we grow. How do we grow? Um, we're not always going to get things right. Okay, so sometimes things will happen, and maybe, maybe you did have a situation at school and you saw something that you didn't like, but you're a bit too scared to say it. And, how can we learn from that? What can we do differently next time if you're in a similar situation? Okay, it's not about shaming them, because after all, they are children. And like I said, even we as adults find it difficult to have these situations. We've all been in situations where somebody has said something unpleasant, said something you don't agree with, said something you don't like, said something that's offended you. And we've all been in situations, I bet, where we've not said anything. We've kind of just awkwardly laughed or whatever it might be. So if we as adults behave like that, we can't possibly expect children to get it right all the time and straight away. So it's about modeling that to them and encouraging them and giving them the skills and the tools. So let's not say, oh, you saw this happen at school and you didn't say anything. That's really terrible and not good enough. They're kids. Cut them some slack. And instead, we can flip that. Instead of shaming and blaming and saying that was really bad and you didn't do a good job, say to them, okay, next time, I understand sometimes it can be scary, but how can we fix this next time? What can we do next time? Apologize when you make a mistake. Okay, so it's when you as an adult make a mistake, apologize, because it's encouraging your kids to apologize too. When they make a mistake, encourage them to apologize. Like I said, it has to be a genuine apology, not a forced apology. Um, Talk to them about the consequences of speaking up. So, what's the mistake you made when you chose to stand up and speak out? Sorry, let me rephrase that. So, talk about the fact that sometimes even in speaking up or speaking out, we can make mistakes, and that's okay. We can learn from those mistakes and we can get it better next time. um, I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. Again, I'm not sure when this was. Actually, I think it was probably last year. I was in a school somewhere outside of London and I was doing a session just like this, and it was all about speaking up and speaking out. And a child said, "Oh, we should all be nice to each other and we should all be actively anti-racist, because it's not other people's fault that they're black. They didn't ask to be black and they didn't, that's not their fault." And he said it in a way that was not, the phrasing wasn't ideal. I got what he was trying to say, but the phrasing was still not great. Um, but those are the sorts of things that I mean. Okay, how could we rephrase that differently next time? I really appreciated where he was coming from, and I thought it was a really valiant effort. However, the phrasing was not great. And even in standing up and speaking up out, we can sometimes be a little bit clumsy with the way that we say things. So it's just about, letting your child know that that can happen, but it's okay. We can do things differently next time. Um, did you make a mistake in not speaking up and not standing up and not speaking out? Ask them this. And again, this transcends racism. This goes for all types of bullying. Sometimes we see things at school that we know are not right. And as children see things, they know that they're not right. And sometimes they still choose not to say anything. So talk about that. Talk about fear. Talk about why that might be. Talk about what can happen next time. Um, so I want to wrap up. Um, to conclude, anti racism is a team effort. This is essentially what I've been saying for the past few weeks. It's a team effort. People of color or racialized people cannot be expected to just have these kind of cyclical conversations about racism amongst our own communities. No, everybody has to be having these conversations and everybody has to move the conversation forward. If we're all on the same page, then we're more likely to make progress. by having these hot conversations, remember, honest, open, transparent, by learning, by educating ourselves, by reading, by, we're making a bigger change in the world. And I wouldn't ever underestimate what sort of change that you are making. So I think it's really important to kind of, um, appreciate that all of this stuff when having these conversations, whether it be like a 2 minute conversation with your child, or whether it's turning up to these sessions 3 weeks in a row and listening to me talk for 3 hours, it's all really, really important work. Talk to your children, talk to each other, talk to your children about race and racism. Recognize the beauty in difference and the diversity of human experiences. Celebrate it. Talk about how wonderful the world is. Read some of those books if you've got an opportunity to read some of those books that I suggested about diversity. I think those, again, these are really, really wonderful things that you could do to kind of do your part. Stand side by side with people of color. Okay, so for people who experience racism, it can be an incredibly lonely experience. And that's literally me talking from my own experiences. It can be very isolating. And it's always very comforting to know that there are people around me, and there's a support system. And I think that's really important for all of us to recognize as well. Um, Ask questions and ask for help if you are unsure. And this is not to say, if you have questions about racism, that you always go and ask, I don't know, your black friend and things like that, because that can be awkward and that can also be quite re-traumatizing. So I always say to people, Google is your best friend. If you're not sure about something, there is going to be an article out there. If you type it into Google and do a little bit of research, I promise you'll find something out. Okay, the other person you can ask is me. This is my job, so by all means, send me a message. On Instagram, if you have a question about something, you can always ask me. I don't know everything, but I have learned a few tricks and tips over the years, so I will try my best to help you out there. Um, Remember where this is all going. So by having these awkward conversations, which they sometimes can be, um, we're creating happier, healthier, and more hopeful children. And it's really interesting how many people say to me, like, oh, well, you're not going to get rid of racism altogether. And, you can't possibly take on the whole world. You can't do this and you can't do that. Um, I've even had people say, oh, well, what's the point in all this? Why do you even do a rise? Because there's always going to be racist people out there. And I think hope is a really important thing. And I think it's something that we should cling on to and we should give to our children, because why should it be that way? Why have we reached a point where people genuinely think that things can never ever change? And maybe, that's me being a little bit unrealistic, but I think if we want to give our kids something to hold on to, I think hope is one of those things for sure. As I said, books are your absolute best friend. I have so many book recommendations. So much of what I've talked about today was taken from This Book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell. Um, in the first session, in the first session, I also recommended Wish We Knew What to Say by Dr. Pragya Agarwal, and I apologize if I've mispronounced her name. There's another book called Bringing Up Race, and it's by a lady called Uju Asika, which I recommended in the first session as well. But all of those books are absolutely fantastic if you kind of want to learn more about these sorts of conversations and know how to have these sorts of conversations. Um, I want to say a huge, huge thank you to everybody who has come this week, last week, the week before, or maybe you were only able to attend one or two. That's absolutely fine. As I said, these sessions are being recorded, and at some point I will upload them onto the Arise YouTube channel, and then you'll be given a password to access the videos. So they won't be for, the whole for everyone to see, but they will be available for Rhodes Avenue parents and guardians. But I want to say a huge, huge thank you. It's been absolutely wonderful. I thoroughly enjoy working with Rhodes Avenue. I've had a partnership with Rose for quite some time now, and it's always a pleasure. I wish you a really, really wonderful rest of the year. I know things are getting incredibly busy, but let's make sure that we are looking after ourselves, we're looking after each other. A little shameless plug. I am on all of the things. I'm on Instagram. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Arise Project UK. I'm also on LinkedIn. Um, I do this as in corporate settings as well. So if you are interested in having me come to your place of work, obviously that wouldn't be through the Arise project because Arise is for schools and educational settings, but on a corporate level, I say corporate, but basically a non-educational level, if you would like me to come in and talk to your workplace about anti-racism or anything to do with equality, diversity, inclusion, then you can book me through Inclusive Group, where I'm a senior associate. And with Inclusive Group, I've done loads of work with wonderful organizations. I've worked with Warner Brothers, Apple, Booking.com, Lloyd's Bank. I can't name loads of different organizations and companies. Marks and Spencers, that's another one. But yeah, if you're interested in me coming to your place of work, then please contact Inclusive Group. And that is the end of my shameless plug. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a second, and I'm actually going to stop recording because this is the point at which I always ask people